If I could sum up why Breath of the Wild is so special to me in a single phrase, it would be the joy of exploration. This game may be my favorite game of all time. I know that that's a huge statement, but I think that it's true. This game, to me, is like Final Fantasy VII to the previous generation. I feel like if I don't get out my thoughts on this game, I'll explode. There are so many special things about Breath of the Wild, but I can't talk about all of them in the introduction. So I won't. Breath of the Wild was released on March 3rd, 2017. The critical reception for this game was absolutely insane. Every single major gaming news outlet was giving it 10 out of 10s. IGN, GameScoop, Polygon, GameSpot, Game Informer, Destructoid, you get the point. But why? I'm not sure that I can give you the real answer. But I can tell you this much. It did not deserve those scores. Reviews from these companies are supposed to give scores for an average person. This game is a 10 out of 10 for me, but that's my opinion. This game feels like it was tailor-made for me, but we'll get into that. I will say that for an average person to be told that this game is perfect in every way is very misleading. It makes them think whether they enjoy this type of game or not, they will love Breath of the Wild. But back to the question at hand. Why did this game receive 10s across the board? Well, there are two reasons for that. 1, the game is really good. 2, it has this on the box. And this seems to be a running theme with game reviewers. Zelda has such a long and treasured history of great games that if a Zelda game is great, it's hailed as perfect. The critical reception of this game does not particularly affect my enjoyment of Breath of the Wild. I do think that it's the reason some people dislike it more than they otherwise would, so I wanted to address it. But now that that's finished, I want to get into the actual game. My main focus on the topic of dungeons will be shrines. But first, a message to Zach. I know that you've never played a Zelda game before, so you have no idea what dungeons are. In their simplest form, dungeons are areas in the game separated from the main world. It's almost like entering a cave. Once you're inside, you'll solve puzzles and fight enemies until you get to the end and fight a boss. And usually somewhere in there you get an item. Shrines are basically mini versions of the dungeons from the other Zelda games. And by mini versions of dungeons, I more so mean the designers, sometimes literally, took a dungeon, separated each of its rooms, and each of those rooms became its own shrine. Some shrines you'll be solving a single puzzle, some you'll solve several, and some you fight a mini-boss. My least favorite part of Zelda games were always the dungeons. You'd be stuck in these dark, moody, underground caverns with ominous music playing for about an hour. And then you finally get back to the fun part of exploring the rest of the world. That being said, these shrines feel like they were tailor-made to be perfect for me. They take about 5 to 15 minutes and they are easily understandable. I never found any of the solutions to be overly obtuse. It was always clear what I was supposed to do. Although on my first playthrough, there were exactly 2 shrines that I could not understand. But looking back, that was probably my fault more than anything else. But not only are the puzzles and amount of time to complete these shrines perfect, the way you access them is equally as perfect. You find them as you explore the world. There's no cutscene or anything leading you into them. This makes the balance of puzzle solving to exploration much more balanced than it has been in previous games. But you can also activate the shrines without entering them, meaning you can explore without being interrupted, and then return back to the shrines when you want to complete them. Again, this feels like it was tailor-made for me. Every criticism I had about the dungeons in other Zelda games has been fixed. Yes, there are more traditional dungeons with the divine beasts, but shrines feel different because they are more integrated into the exploration than divine beasts are. The divine beasts focus more on moving mechanisms in a 3D space. The Zora Divine Beast has you moving an elephant's trunk, which acts like a waterfall which can move gears and put out fire. You can also ride on the elephant's trunk to get to higher portions of the beast. The Rito Divine Beast allows you to tilt the entire beast so you can fly to different sections. You can actually beat this one without tilting it at all. You can either see this as a poor dungeon design or as good movement controls. I see it as the latter. It makes me think of things like in Mario Odyssey where you can get moons without using captures once you master Mario's movement well enough. The Goron Divine Beast allows you to shift the beast between standing upright and at a 90-degree angle. This isn't as interesting as the others because the puzzles focus less on the shift and more on fire-based puzzles. They're a lot of fun and it helped to keep it interesting since its premise was so similar to the Rito Beast. The Gerudo Divine Beast is the best one in the game. All the puzzles are based around electricity and you have to move these rings around inside the beast to get power to different sections. It also has the best boss of all the divine beasts, but that also leads me into a bit of a complaint. All of the bosses in this game are incredibly easy. The Gerudo Divine Beast boss is the only one that presents any sort of challenge. Even the final boss is easy. I'd argue the final boss was easier than any of the others in the game. At least if you had beat the Divine Beasts it was. If you don't beat any Divine Beasts, you have to fight each boss from each of the Divine Beasts before fighting Ganon, and there are no checkpoints in between. Now, this is a good final boss. It ratchets up the tension and it really challenges you, as the final fight of a game should. But when you do it after beating all the Divine Beasts, which most people will, not only do you not have to do any of the fights before Ganon, but Ganon's health is knocked down by 50%. I beat this boss on my first try without dying on my first playthrough. I think this says a lot about the difficulty of bosses in the game. Even though the final boss is laughably easy, the dungeon before him, Hyrule Castle, is the most interesting semi-dungeon in the game. The music is a mix of all of Ganon's themes throughout Zelda history, as well as Zelda's Lullaby and the overworld theme thrown in there. Hyrule Castle is more in line with the rest of the game in the way you approach it. You can come to the castle at any angle, and there are tons of different entrance points to support this. Unlike the Divine Beasts, which are rigid in the way that you enter them, there are all kinds of hidden secrets throughout Hyrule Castle, and it's overall just a joy to play. I hope that the sequel has more dungeons like this. The atmosphere and tone of this game are very somber, and this is as it should be. After all, this is a story of how a hero failed, and what he has to do to make up for that failure. You see the consequences of a world where Ganon won. There are only 7 villages in the game still standing. You find ruins all over the world. Some of them are even from past Zelda games such as Lon Lon Ranch. There's also things such as Makar Island, which references Makar from Wind Waker, and it's assumed to be his burial place. One of the largest contributors to the atmosphere of this game is its music. Now, I've heard complaints over the years about this game's music. Compared to past Zelda games, there are no memorable tracks. There aren't any heroic themes that make me feel like Link. And to that I say, that's kind of the point. Knowing that you failed to protect an entire kingdom from a seemingly unstoppable threat, knowing that you're the only one that could have prevented all the destruction that you see, knowing that you have to fight him again, and knowing that if you fail, there will not be a third chance. Should you really feel triumphant and heroic? The tracks in this game are very intentional. Some have a sound of being ruined versions of the older game's songs, just like the environments. For example, the theme that plays in the Temple of Time is the same song from Ocarina of Time, but they removed several notes from it to make it sound incomplete and unresolved. A similar thing is done to the overworld theme from the original Zelda, which plays while riding a horse at night. I also don't agree with this strange notion that if a game's music isn't memorable, then it must be bad. If anything, I would say the music of a game should complement it to the point that it blends in with everything else. Good music enhances a game without drawing attention to itself. Although it may make for a soundtrack that I don't find myself listening to much outside of the game, it still makes for a good game track because it enhances the gameplay. Undertale is a game that does a good job of putting music in the forefront of the game, mostly because the music is so important in setting that tone. While in Breath of the Wild, this tone is sometimes set better by no music whatsoever. Even beyond the idea of setting a tone, the music also adds to the environment. When you're running through a field and a quiet, short melody plays, it sets your mind at ease. It assures you that it's just you running through this field or climbing up this mountain. There's no enemies or puzzles or bombastic music tracks that are going to interrupt this poignant moment. It's peaceful. I have a complicated relationship with the story of this game. Let me first say that whether the story was a masterpiece or a picture of a bowl of bananas for 5 minutes, it wouldn't affect my opinion of the game. That being said, the story of this game is a lot closer to a bowl of bananas than a masterpiece. The story of this game focuses on Zelda, not Link. It focuses on her quest to unlock the power of the Triforce within her. Most of the cutscenes play out as static shots of characters talking to each other. The few action scenes that you get never last for more than a few seconds. The voice acting is absolute crap. I'm sure that this is not revolutionary to anybody. Most of the dialogue sounds like it was done with a single take. The voice actors sound like they're trying to be almost caricatures of the characters they portray, especially King Rome and Daruk. I notice they seem like they're straining to keep up the grovelly voices that they do. The only exception to this is Link. The voice actor does a spectacular job with every piece of spoken dialogue that he gives. The very best thing about the story of this game is that it can almost completely be skipped. I actually have two meanings to that. First, you can skip every single cutscene by pressing pause or whatever. Second, you can literally just not find most of the story in the game and go fight Ganon immediately. Or you can go around the world and not find any of the cutscenes and then go fight Ganon and be done. It sounds simple, but there are so many games that just force the story down your throat, which makes replaying the game a chore if you didn't enjoy the story. Even though the story may be quite lackluster, I've actually grown attached to the champions. Not because of time spent with them, because that's almost none, but more so because of the reverence that townsfolk showed towards them. Particular praise to the Gerudo and Goron villages. These places seem to revolve around tradition and around celebrating their respective champions, which makes it very interesting to talk to all the people. One thing I noticed that isn't exactly story is the expressiveness of Link. Now, Wind Waker probably has the most expressive version of Link, but I noticed that in Breath of the Wild, Link uses his entire body when expressing. He'll move around his arms or sway back and forth or put his hands on his hips. It's nice to see this since he doesn't speak, but I will say Wind Waker still did this better. Even so, being less expressive can still be seen as a positive because it allows the player to project themselves more easily onto their character. Sure, you may say that's a stretch, but this review is going to be as positive as I can make it, gosh dang it. The way the story is unlocked in this game is finding memories through the world. You are given a picture, the landscape of somewhere in the world, and you have to find the place that matches that picture. These are great because you have to keep the pictures in the back of your head while you're exploring. The only complaint I have about them is the final memory, which is from a forest with no discernible landmarks to help you find your way. It could be any forest around the map. But my little brother Josiah found it without any guides, so maybe it's just me. I think telling the story through memories is the only good way to tell a story in an open world, while also keeping the world truly open. I think the story fails because of poor writing, plot, and acting, not because of the method of delivery. After defeating Ganon, the game ends the same way that it begins, with the small plain text of the title of the game. This is actually a pretty good emotional gut punch. It reminds you how far you've come since the beginning of your journey, and it causes you to reflect as the credits roll. Even if the story may be lackluster, I feel as though the ending of the game does its job with aplomb. Speaking of finding memories throughout the world, let's talk about exploration. Perfect segue. You start this game with nothing and you go from there. Before getting out of the Shrine of Resurrection, you learn that you can climb. That's it. This is all you have in your arsenal, at least in relation to exploration. You finish the Great Plateau and get the paraglider. This is a huge increase to the rate at which you can explore the world. Additionally, you can unlock stamina upgrades by completing shrines, which increases your ability to explore even more. You get a horse, Rivali's Gale, and, at least if you have the DLC, a motorcycle. Each of these things increase the rate at which you find new things in the world. Let me explain with a graph, because math is fun. The world does not unlock like this, it unlocks more like this. The amount of exploration increases at an exponential rate as you play through the game. And the game needs to do this, otherwise it will begin to feel samey and the player will get bored. Now I would explain this gameplay as rewarding gameplay. Now, that sounds simple, but I'm going to make a comparison to Uncharted. I would describe that series as rewards for gameplay. Now both of these terms are extremely similar, but the difference is critical. When playing Uncharted, I feel like I get rewarded for playing the game with a cutscene, dialogue, or one of the fantastic action set pieces. It feels like I trudged through the game to get to something better. When I play Breath of the Wild, the gameplay is its own reward. I want to climb up a mountain so I can see a shrine. The end goal is the shrine, but it's fun balancing stamina while you climb. It's fun paragliding down the mountain to get to that shrine. And the shrine is fun once you get there. There's nothing wrong with the way Uncharted works, but it's one of the contributors to my love of Breath of the Wild. Uncharted is obviously not the only game that does this, but I played it recently, so it was a clear example in my mind. As I said in the introduction, the reason this game is so special to me is the joy of exploration. They nailed the exploration so well that the rest of the game could have been a load of crap and the game would have still been fantastic. The biggest contributor to the joy of exploration is how the main quests work. You finish the Great Plateau and find the old man. He tells you some information about the story, then he says, and I'm paraphrasing, "I believe it would be foolish to fight Ganon right now. I suggest that you go to Kakariko Village and talk to Impa." A marker is then put on your map, and that's it. You can turn off this marker, or leave it on, and completely ignore the king's suggestions. You can fight Ganon, go to Impa, or just wander around finding Koroks like me. Now let's compare that to some other open world games. Horizon Zero Dawn. You receive a story mission, a marker is added to your map, a point is put on your screen, a point is marked on your compass, and the exact path to that point is labeled on your map. GTA 5. You receive a story mission, a marker is added to your map, a point is put on your screen. No compass this time, but the exact path to that point is labeled on your map with your GPS, which stays in the corner of your screen the entire time. There are other games that do the same thing, like The Witcher 3, Red Dead Redemption 2, Batman Arkham Knight. None of these are bad games, far from it. But these practices, in my opinion, make for poor open world games. Additionally, why is all of that needed anyway? Do developers really think that their players are so stupid that they can't figure out how to get somewhere on the map if it isn't outlined 10 different ways? This is the biggest difference between those games and Breath of the Wild. Trust. Trust that a player can figure out how to get somewhere. Trust that a player can solve a puzzle. Trust that a player won't get bored if you don't railroad them into something fun. And that right there is very important. It's up to you how you explore and what fun you find in this game. I would never recommend this to someone as their first game. It's a game for gamers. It takes the old school approach and modernizes it. It isn't too obtuse so as to become unplayable, but it isn't so easy so as to be boring. There's very little guidance, and that is critical to exploration. If you are told to go somewhere, it isn't exploration. It is a task that needs to be completed. Every time I find something, it feels like I found it, no matter what it is. Shrines, Korok seats, landmarks, towers, everything. I don't feel like I'm being led somewhere to find something great. It feels like as I wander, I discover great things. This was especially true on my first playthrough back in 2017. I completely forgot what King Rome said, and I didn't find the adventure log until about 20 hours in. But I think that that's telling. In 20 hours of playing with no objective, I didn't get bored. The reason that you can wander aimlessly and still have so much fun is because the game is very densely packed with content. I think it's telling how dense the game is that I didn't find one of the largest side quests in my first 100 hours of playing. I had to have a friend tell me about it. But strangely enough, even with it being so dense, there is a lot of time when you're wandering the fields or climbing a mountain. It allows for a lot of quiet reflection or simply appreciating the beauty of the world you're exploring. My experience in this playthrough was very similar as well. I played for about 20 hours, all of which was aimless wandering and finding shrines, doing side quests. I marked locations that I knew were memories from previous playthroughs so I could get them later, but I just wandered around. I didn't get bored from this, which is really important. The game could remove every part of the story and all the main missions and even the divine beasts, and it would still be an insanely enjoyable game. Maybe not a 10 to me, but simply through the elegant design of the world, this game triumphs over every other open world game. I'm not sure if I can separate the open world from exploration. After all, the world is the thing that you're exploring, right? What I'm saying is there may be some things in this section that should be in the exploration section. But I don't really care, it's my critique. The world has these huge landmarks all over the place. Death Mountain, Hyrule Castle, the Bridge of Hylia, the Gerudo Highlands, Divine Beasts, and their lasers after you defeat them, Mount Lanayru, Faron Forest, that's just to name a few. All of these help you get your bearings on where you are, and where everything else in the world is, to the point that you can play this game without a map. In fact, during this playthrough, I had the minimap turned off, and I think I only opened the map to fast travel and to find the places for the DLC missions. More on those in the DLC section. The world sometimes feels like it's one big puzzle to solve, which I think is a good thing since this is a Zelda game after all. This is especially true when considering the Koroks. They provide mini puzzles all throughout the world. I want to talk about how puzzle solving and combat flow into exploration, but I think that that's a better fit for the design section. The villages are probably the most exciting thing to find in the game. 4 of the 8 villages host divine beasts, so you're likely to find at least half of them. Zora's Domain is by far the most visually impressive village, and it was definitely intentional. There is so much leading you towards this as your first divine beast, and by extension, first village. The designers wanted you to be impressed. However, I'd argue that the Gerudo and Rito are even better villages, even though they're less visually impressive. Gerudo Village in particular feels the most alive. I feel like everyone in the village has interesting things to say and quests to do. The design of the village is beautiful as well, with the waterfall flowing from a giant rock at the edge of town. It truly is an oasis in the desert. I also think the Gerudo has the best divine beasts of any other village. The largest complaint I have about the world is that it's static. The main story has nearly no effect on the world at large. When you beat the Zora Divine Beast, it stops raining. That is the biggest effect the story has on the world in this entire game. For each of the other villages, when you beat the Divine Beast, it stops terrorizing them. It never felt like the Divine Beasts were any sort of trouble, though. Especially with the Gerudo one, which wasn't anywhere near Gerudo Village, and because they don't feel like a threat, when you fix them, it doesn't feel like you really did anything. This is actually one of the few things that I thought Ocarina of Time did really well. In Ocarina of Time, you first visit each town as young Link. You see all the towns bustling, just as they should be. When you return as adult Link, the towns are devoid, sometimes overrun with enemies. You want to fix it because you remember a better time. In Breath of the Wild, you are simply told that there is a problem. You are never shown this problem. Therefore, when you fix said problem, it doesn't feel like anything was accomplished except checking off an item on a list. However, this complaint is mitigated by one of the best side quests in the game, Terrytown, but I'll talk more about that under the section on side quests. The combat in Breath of the Wild is especially good. I rarely find a combat system that I enjoy in a game. Jedi Fallen Order's combat was really enjoyable, and I guess that game just rips off Dark Souls, so I guess I'd like that combat too. But the combat in Breath of the Wild is some of the most varied I've ever seen. There are so many different ways to approach a combat encounter, and this also means that there are many forms of combat to discuss. The one-on-one combat in this game is, strangely enough, an offshoot of the Dark Souls battle system. At least in its most efficient form it is. The best way to defeat enemies is to wait for them to attack and jump out of the way so that it opens opportunity to do a flurry rush, where you hit them a bunch of times without them being able to hit back. Once you get good enough of this, combat becomes a bit of a spectacle. Stealth is done fantastically in Breath of the Wild. The reason I, and most others, hate stealth sections in games is that they are strictly pass-fail. Get seen, fail, reload. Breath of the Wild has several states of stealth. Here's a short list of the states that I could think of. Unseen by enemies, an enemy notices you, but doesn't quite know it's you there. An enemy sees you, the entire camp sees you, you're fighting the enemies, and you're dead. In other words, it isn't immediate failure if you are seen. You can still fight your way out of the situation. The only kinda exception to this is the Yiga clan hideout. You are killed in one hit and fairies don't revive you. It is possible to fight your way out of this, I've even done it a couple of times, but it doesn't make sense to me that a section like this exists in a game that seemed to do away with this type of annoying stealth. That being said, the Yiga clan hideout is still one of my favorite sections of the game. Aerial combat and combat with the bow is really great as well. You have 6 different arrow types at your disposal. This alone brings more variety to the bow than any other Zelda game. But the best part of the bow is when you pull it out mid-air. The whole world goes into slow motion and you aim your shot carefully and hit it exactly. This is one of the most bad but things you can do in the game. I've seen some people say that there isn't much enemy variety in this game, and I actually agreed with them for a long time. But playing through it again and really thinking about it, this isn't true. Obviously you have your Bokoblins, Moblins, and Lizalfos as your most common enemy types. But that doesn't mean that there isn't enemy variety. You got Hinox's Yiga members, Lionel's, Guardians, Mini-Guardians, Moldugas, Choo-Choos, Wizrobes, Octoroks, and of course, bees. Not to mention, enemies such as Bokoblins, Moblins, and Lizalfos can all carry any type of weapon, meaning that even if they were the only type of enemy, the variety would come from every type of weapon that they can have. Combat does ultimately break by the end of the game once you get some insanely high-powered weapons and champion abilities. But I actually really like this because I think you should be able to break the game once you get near the end. It reminds me of something like unlocking Supersonic or going through old areas at the end of a Metroid game. You're more powerful than you were ever supposed to be originally, but that's the fun of it. Okay, I say side quests, but this is mostly going to focus on two interlocked side quests in particular. And if you've played the game, you probably know what they are. From the Ground Up and Hylian Homeowner. Starting with Hylian Homeowner. For Hylian Homeowner, you buy a house. Let me repeat, you buy a house in an adventure game. Not only that, but you continue to buy all kinds of furnishings and other stuff for your house. You buy weapon racks so that you can save your most special weapons like the champion's gear. You get a bed so you can refill your hearts. I love this quest, and it turned Hateno Village from a good village to my favorite village. Well, maybe besides Gerudo Town. But I said I'd be talking about two side quests, so let's get to the second side quest. From the Ground Up is the best side quest in the game, hands down. You literally build an entire town from nothing, and it's called Terrytown. You find townspeople to populate the village, you gather wood to build houses, and you find people to run shops. Everything is done by you and Hudson. And the village isn't like some half-hearted version of the other villages where they did the bare minimum. No. There are side quests from villagers, there are merchants, including one that is the only way to get some weapons after they break, and everything else you would expect from any other town. It is incredible. However, I do have one question. Why is this the only quest like it? Think about it. Hyrule is ruined. You find broken down buildings and towns all over the place. So what if, just like how you rebuilt Terrytown, you could rebuild all these broken down places across Hyrule? Honestly, I think that would have made for a better story than the one that we got, or at least a more interesting one. It wouldn't have to affect the openness of the world either, just like the memories don't. You could find different broken down villages and just have Hudson come there and help you repair them, while you provide materials and townsfolk. One last thing about Terrytown that I think is ingenious. There are shrines right next to each village so that you can easily teleport to all of them, and this is the way that it needs to be. But the shrine that's closest to Terrytown is up on a hill right above it. This means that you have to glide into town from above. Now let me tell you why this is genius. It forces you to see everything that has been added since last time you were there. Every single time you go to Terrytown, you see the entire village and everything that you've accomplished. Let me start the talk about DLC by saying that Breath of the Wild does not need DLC. It is a complete experience, and you do not need the DLC to fully experience it. This will be the most negative part of my critique, because the DLC doesn't seem to have nearly as much heart or care put into it as the rest of the game. Which is a real shame, because this could have been used to fix up the story a bit, or even just tell an interesting story of its own. But it didn't. So I have to talk about what we did get. This game commits the cardinal sin of DLC. It took content that was finished out of the game and put it into DLC. Okay, now I only have proof for one part of the DLC, and it's admittedly pretty small. Hero's Path allows you to watch your journey through Hyrule from the map screen. You can see every step, death, and teleportation throughout your journey. However, when the first pack of DLC released, I used Hero's Path and saw everything from the beginning of my journey, not from when I purchased the DLC. This means that the game was already logging that information when I started. So that means that the Hero's Path was complete and they removed it to sell it later. I know that this is extremely small, but who's to say that they didn't do this with other parts of the game? I mean, it makes too much sense that the Trial of the Sword should be in the base game, right? The Master Sword has an attack power of 60, but only sometimes. It makes too much sense to have a way to upgrade it so that it can always attack 60. It may not have been complete, but it probably should have been in the base game. The other parts of the DLC feel much more appropriate. Costumes, extra story, and more shrines. Although the way that you get to some of the new content is a bit tedious, especially for that extra story content. Almost no new content was added to the world. You basically go to 12 different points on the map and get 12 new shrines. The way you get to them is very tedious. You get a picture of each point of the map from a bird's eye view, and you have to figure out where on the map it is. From there, you'll find a shrine by doing some small task. After that, you re-challenge each boss from the divine beasts, but you are now limited in what weapons you can use. This was actually a lot of fun, but I wish that there were more limits which made these refights more challenging. The main bosses were pretty easy already, so I would have enjoyed 4 really difficult versions of them. One thing that was interesting about these refights is that they all focus on a different weapon type. Goron, heavy weapon, Gerudo, short sword, Zora, spear, and Rito, bow. After doing all of that, you get to a new divine beast. This divine beast has you solving puzzles using each element in the game: fire, wind, electricity, and water. It all links together through the central mechanic of gears. Gears, that seems like a strange thing to base a divine beast around, doesn't it? Yeah, it kinda does, until you finish. After completing this divine beast, you get a motorcycle. Now the gears start to make sense. Also, side note, the divine beast is shaped like an engine, for anyone who didn't know. This alone makes all the tedium of the DLC missions worth it. I love this motorcycle, and I love driving around Hyrule on it. It's about the last thing I ever expected in a game set in this magical world. Overall, the DLC is kinda crap. But I remember when it released, I was happy just to have an excuse to return to the land of Hyrule for more adventures. If you love this game and its world, and you simply want more of it, then I would say the DLC is worth it. The mechanics of this game feel like they're married together. Combat, puzzle solving, and exploration all flow in and out of each other in an extremely natural way. Your reward for exploring the world is enemy camps to fight, puzzles leading to Koroks, or shrines leading to more puzzles and combat. I don't think that you could remove a single mechanic from this game without ruining every other one. This all leads into something I call the one more thing mentality. The one more thing mentality is exactly what it sounds like. You have the list in your mind of what you want to do, and you think, okay, I'll just get this one more shrine and be done. Oh wait, now I have 4 spirit orbs. I'll go to town and get a heart while I'm there. Oh look, a villager needs my help with a side quest. I'll just do that and be done. Oh look, is that a Korok over there? Because every mechanic of the game flows in and out of each other, it becomes very easy to play the game for hours thinking you'll just do one more thing. But given how long it can take to complete the game, how replayable is it? I want to address replayability because I usually complain about it in modern games. I first want to say that this game isn't ripe for a replay only because of how long it is. The game is naturally replayable in the same way that any great game is replayable, just because it's fun. But this game does make a few strides to make itself more replayable than a typical game. Breath of the Wild revolves around a clockwork system. This concept is a little more complicated than I feel like explaining, but it boils down to this. A player is given a set of tools and is allowed to solve a problem any way they see fit using those tools. There is no rigid solution to puzzles, no exact way to approach combat, none of that. This basically means that you can have a different experience each time you play the game. I actually found the real solutions to a lot of shrines during this playthrough. I never knew that I had been doing it the wrong way the other 3 times that I played it. But the real beauty of this game is that it can be as long or short as you want. You can finish the Great Plateau and defeat Ganon in a couple of hours if you aren't rushing. So I guess this game really is perfect for replaying. Okay. This game also does another thing that's just as annoying as holding back complete features for DLC. Let me explain. This game was originally being developed for the Wii U. As such, it had a few extra features the Switch does not, namely the gamepad. Now, the gamepad was a pretty poor choice by Nintendo, but one thing it was always good for was use as a map and inventory management. So why doesn't the Wii U version of this game use those features? Well, it did. At the Game Awards in 2014, they showed gameplay of Breath of the Wild, and it had gamepad functionality with a map and inventory management. So why did they remove it? Well, the Wii U was kind of a failure, at least financially. They didn't want the Wii U version to be better than the Switch version because it might have hampered their new console from taking off. Essentially, the Switch stole the Wii U's swan song. Pro Mode was what the game originally would look like, with the map and other UI elements on the gamepad. So instead of enjoying this beautiful world, when you first open up the game, you have a giant mini map in the corner along with 3 gauges, a clock, a weather forecast, 4 champion abilities, a D-pad with 3 giant icons, and your heart meter. Pro Mode removed these elements and allows you to appreciate the world as it was meant to be seen. However, I would not recommend this for a first-time player. When I tried to play with Pro Mode on my first playthrough, I was constantly opening the map to see where I was and where my markers were. Now, on my 4th playthrough, I have a very good concept of what the map looks like and where I am at all times. So playing with Pro Mode off felt natural because I already knew where I was and I could open the map when I needed to teleport somewhere. I wish that the original vision of this game could have been fully realized through use of the gamepad. It would have helped you not spend so much time in a pause menu managing inventory and looking at a map. But on my 4th playthrough, as I mentioned, I found that I wasn't spending hardly any time in pause menus or looking at the map screen. This was because I have become so familiar with the world over my 450 plus hours of playing the game. But I would have loved to experience the game like this on my first playthrough. One of the complaints I see a lot about this game is the rain. When it rains in this game, it makes it almost impossible to climb. This could have been a unique challenge to overcome, but instead it usually just becomes a time investment, waiting for the rain to stop or sitting at a fire until it goes away. But what if they had made a way to overcome this? You could get an outfit or something that would let you climb during the rain. But they didn't do this, so it's always an issue. Then I got the Thunder Helm in Gerudo Town. Now you get this by completing every side quest in Gerudo Town. And the Thunder Helm makes you immune to shock when you wear it. Now, it always surprised me that this was the only village that had something like this. Like, couldn't each village have some sort of special relic passed down through generations, and you could unlock it by doing all the side quests? For example, complete all the side quests in Goron Village, and you get an item that lets you swim in lava. Rito could put wind behind you when you're gliding, a la Wind Waker, and most importantly, Zora could give you something that lets you climb in the rain. This would have given more incentive to complete side quests in each of the towns and would have fixed the annoying rain in the game. My favorite part of the map in this game is that every marker on it is placed by you. When you get to the top of a tower and add a portion of the map to your Sheikah slate, it doesn't fill up every shrine and Korok seed in the area. Because of this, the game really feels like you were exploring an uncharted world. In a game like Spider-Man PS4 or Assassin's Creed, when you get to one of these towers, all kinds of markers are added to your map. This makes those games feel more like you have a list of tasks to complete, rather than an amount of treasures that you can discover. Now that sounds like a dig against those games, but it's not. I'm using them to explain what makes Breath of the Wild different, same as most other times I mention other games. This game has a lot of technical issues. One that was particularly noticeable in this playthrough was how much pop-in there was. It seems like there is way more pop-in in this playthrough than I've ever had any other time playing the game. Now, this may be because of updates which improved the performance, but it also may just be me misremembering. Two really bad examples of these performance issues both came about an hour before I finished the game. I went to Hateno Village on my motorcycle, and the game stopped to load for about 20 seconds. When it resumed, none of the houses had doors. I went to my house, and none of my weapon racks were loaded in. This happened a second time under the exact same circumstances when I returned to finish one last side quest before defeating Ganon. There's also the issue of the frame rate, especially in the Korok Forest. You cannot go there without the frame rate having a complete meltdown. Given how consistent this is, they should have done something to fix this, such as putting fewer plants or something like that. The frame rate also drops when there are lots of enemies on screen or when there's lots of fire, but this is much more excusable than something like Korok Forest, where it is every single time you enter. Despite what I've said, I do think that most of these issues are justified. The scope of this game is immense. You may think that's not true because there are tons of open world games that don't have nearly as many technical issues as this game, but I've stated many times throughout this review, I don't think any game has done an open world right besides Breath of the Wild. Given that, I say that these issues are justified. This section is literally just what it sounds like. A bunch of random thoughts I had during the game that don't really need any further elaboration and didn't particularly fit anywhere else in the critique. This game is not the most graphically impressive game. However, the rocks are the best looking rocks I have ever seen in a video game. I am 100% serious, I do not know how they got them looking this good. You can't fully upgrade both your hearts and your stamina, only one or the other. You have 2 hearts missing or 2 stamina containers missing. Even when you get the DLC, which gives you 4 more spirit orbs, you still have 1 missing, and this is kind of annoying. I want to talk to everyone in this game. I don't ever like to do this, even when it's kind of the purpose in most other games. But I feel interested in the people of the world, so I want to see what they have to say. The music in the DLC Divine Beast is a remix of the shrine music. This makes sense because the Divine Beast is more like a shrine since it was created by one of the monks. You have the Sheikah Sensor Plus, which acts as a radar for any item in the Hyrule Compendium. This is invaluable for clothing upgrades or side quests, which need several of one item. This Hyrule Compendium also tells you where you can find items. This may seem insignificant, but when you need to find an item, knowing which area of Hyrule to start searching is incredibly useful. These two combined make it so you never have any trouble finding the items that you need. Despite the insane amount of things that I've said about this game, there is undoubtedly more to say about it. But I've said everything that I want to say. I've explained what makes this game special to me and why I love it so much. And that's enough for me. I think this whole thing may have come off as a bit more negative than I intended. It's much easier to lay out the flaws of a game than it is to praise the things that it's done right. All of the flaws that I've mentioned here are flaws that I've heard other people say, or they're things that I see that I would enjoy if they were added to the game. But none of these actually bug me. And most of them I don't even see as flaws. The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild is perfect. For me. Most of my critical views of this game are for the things that it doesn't do. And I think that's telling. Nearly everything that this game tries to do, it executes perfectly. Even though I see all of this game's shortcomings and flaws, they don't diminish the experience for me. I see them and I understand them, and sometimes I even agree with them. But no matter what I do, I can't make myself dislike any part of this game. I think when Breath of the Wild 2 comes out, it will be a better game than this. This game provides such a perfect base for that game to jump off and improve. But I don't think it will be as impactful. At least not to me. Please don't tell me that I love this game because it says Zelda on the cover. Please don't tell me that it's because I'm biased or I have nostalgia for the game. I had enjoyed exactly one game in the entire Zelda series before playing Breath of the Wild. I wasn't biased when I played the game for the first time. This game is 3 years old. How can I possibly have enough nostalgia for it to affect my opinion at this point? Obviously, I like this game because of my own preferences. I would never deny that, and I'm fine with being told that. But I'm not one of the game reviewers that gave this game a 10 because they grew up with Zelda. This game is the only reason that I'm even interested in the Zelda franchise. This game stood on its own merits 3 years ago, and it stands on its own merits now. I know that I've talked about issues with this game. It takes so many strides forward that it was inevitable that it would make a few stumbles. Even so, I would argue that it has made significantly less stumbles than the rest of the gaming industry when it comes to open world games. I say that because Breath of the Wild realizes the purpose of an open world. It is not tacked on. The open world was created as the focus of the game. Then they made the rest of the game around it. While there are certainly other games that may do open worlds well, none of them have done it as well as The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild.